welcome. Great to have you with us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier, and these are the headlines. Another Hezbollah drone enters Israeli airspace and is downed over the Galilee region. Iran executes a young Jewish Iranian man after a trial activists say was significantly flawed. And several people arrested in connection with a probe into sensitive leaks from the office of the Israeli Prime Minister. First, Israel remains braced for an attack from Iran after the Islamic Republic warned it would use even more powerful warheads than during its previous two strikes. Iran sent a message via Arab diplomats after the United States warned it would not hold Israel back from retaliating. Just 8 days ago, Israeli fighter jets destroyed key parts of Iran's defense capabilities, leaving it vulnerable to any counterattack. Our Jody Notilovitz has the latest.
In response to Israeli strikes on Iranian military targets, Tehran may be planning a counterattack that will use more powerful warheads and other weapons not used in previous attacks. According to media reports which cited Iranian and Arab officials, the response to Israel will be, quote, strong and complex, as a reprisal for the loss of 4 soldiers and a civilian in an Israeli strike on the Islamic Republic just over 1 week ago. Reports indicating that the response could come this week and that Iraqi territory may be used to launch projectiles.
The patterns of our response to the aggressions of the Zionist regime are clear, and at the same time it is natural that we should use all our material and spiritual resources to respond to the aggressions of the Zionist regime. And in this context, we will use all our resources with all our might.
Israel said that its airstrikes on October 26th knocked out Iran's air defenses and missile production capabilities and were a response to Tehran's October 1st launching of almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel.
Iran
is trying to harm Israel. It starts from Gaza and through Lebanon and continues to Yemen and Iraq and other places, and in all of these places we are stopping and striking them.
Since the strikes last month, Israel and the U.S. have warned Iran against retaliating, with the U.S. deploying B-52 bombers in the region. But according to reports, Khamenei felt obliged to issue a retaliation order because of the extent of the damage caused by the multi-hour attack.
The continuation and strengthening of this American presence creates more tension, and it will definitely not deter our resolve to defend ourselves.
At the same time, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said on Sunday that a possible ceasefire between Israel and Iran's allies, Hamas and Hezbollah, could affect the intensity of Tehran's promised onslaught.
So what can we read into those comments from the Iranians? Well, with me in the studio this hour, Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is a former commander in the Special Forces of the IDF. Great to have you with us, Doron. And freshly back from his reporting inside Lebanon, our very own Zach Andrews. Good to have you with us as well, Zach. So, Doron, what are the Iranians up to? Why would they attack Israel right now and risk a counterstrike from Israel when their defence capabilities have been so severely degraded by Israel?
I think there is a dilemma for them, for sure. In the beginning, they were trying to undermine the impact of the Israeli attack, and then it wouldn't force them to retaliate. And I think we calibrated this attack in this fashion that they would have to reconsider whether they should attack. But as the outcomes were coming more and more seen and known, I think they're right now locked a little bit, and as they proclaim they are going to do it, then this is limits the opportunity. So if I were them, I wouldn't attack, but it's hard to estimate whether they would do it after the elections. But they are prepared, they are threatening. After
the American elections?
Yeah, for sure. And they're adding some kind of qualification when they say, well, if something would work out in Lebanon, you can hear an undertone that says, yes, if there would be some kind of peace negotiation, maybe we would not have to do it. So I'm not sure, but I have to really put them on the horns of the dilemma, and they are thinking thoroughly whether to do it, proclaiming they would. Let's see.
And Zach, the message from the United States has been to Iran, basically, don't count on us to hold Israel back this time around. We would very much like this to end now, and all of this, of course, at a hugely sensitive time with the election just a few hours away now.
I think the U.S. has taken it a step further, too, by deploying additional assets, like Jody mentioned in her report. The element here about the B-52 bombers moving an air wing into the Middle East, that's a bit silly, because when you're talking about offensive weapons, offensive capabilities, that airplane's 70, 80 years old, depending on when it was built.
The Iranians complained about that. They said that was destabilizing the region.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going to be dropping a massive, massive amount of bombs, munitions across military sites when Iranian air defenses are down in a joint campaign to try and neutralize as much of the Iranian threat in one go, that's the statement that the U.S. is sending is, look, we have the capability with the Israelis at the same time to knock you completely out of the game if we wanted to, so be very calculated and careful. But as an agent of chaos myself, I'm hoping that whatever happens, I'm not hoping, of course, I'm just being silly, that election night, if they were to choose to respond and launch another ballistic missile, which I think was the most success they've shown with these pointed ballistic missile attacks, if they were to do that during election night, I just want to see what would happen if the American news networks would actually cut into election coverage.
Right, that would be interesting.
And take Israeli coverage live. I don't think it would happen, but if it was a big enough attack, I'd like to see what happens.
Yeah, that is certainly.
I don't know why I'm talking about it. Why I'm.
I don't
it's all
think
connected, isn't it? Well,
yeah.
According to Israeli intelligence, Iran is planning to attack Israel via Iraq, and there are several Iranian-backed militia operating there, and they have attacked both Israel and U.S. interests in Iraq. This is something of a headache for the government in Baghdad, which is allied to both the United States and Iran. We're here to talk about that. Omar Abu Layla is the executive director of Deir ez-Zor 24. Great to have you with us, Omar. So, in theory, how would Iran use Iraq to facilitate an attack against Israel?
Thank you, Laura, for having me again. It's the project of Qasem Soleimani when Ali Khamenei sent him a long time ago, years ago, to design these militia in the region, to use them in this period. Like since 7 October, we've seen all these militia, how they are aggressively active against Israel and also against other countries in the region, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, other countries as well. So this is not new for us. Actually, since the Israelis put huge pressure on Hezbollah recently in the past weeks, we will see more activities from these Iraqi militia, and then later maybe Houthi militia, despite the American-British coalition trying also to limit them in somehow. But for sure, the Islamic regime trying in somehow to use this militia to just to protect their reputation, since the Israelis hit them strongly last time and they denied the strikes. They work on it hardly, like we have no damage. The attacks or the strikes, Israeli strike, were nothing. But lately, when we said, so the image of satellites, they knew exactly that was like something we have to retaliate it, and the next step to use these militia, including the Iraqi militia. And
talking about violating sovereignty, I mean, just how much say does the Iraqi government in Baghdad have over these Iranian militias and what they will do to attack Israel? Because, of course, they will also feel the blowback.
This is a very great question, Laura, because, you know, the Iraqi government, Americans and the other countries, international countries, tried in the past years to strengthen as much as they could. But actually the failure of the foreign policy in the region made the Iraqi government as weak. And that's why Qasem Soleimani and Ali Khamenei work hardly to make these militias stronger than the Iraqi government. And that's why also we see them today. They are so active in Iraq. Just hours ago, they attacked some Israeli sites from the border with Jordan. Amazing, they are moving from between three capitals, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. So these militia have a huge access to three countries because they are stronger than even the Iraqi government. And the Iraqi government cannot control them, actually, because they are not strong enough to stop them or to limit them.
All right, Omar, for now, thank you very much. But please do stay with us, Omar, because I want to move to Syria in a moment. I just want to get a comment from you, Doron, on the threat from the Iraqi front. Israel is fully prepared to deal with that.
Yeah, sure. They operated for a while from there. I mean, we have the capabilities. And since Hezbollah is a little diminished in terms of its weaponry, this is an option they can take. The Iranian push those Shia militia. I think this would be an easier so-called target for us because the distances are closer. and then we can retaliate without engaging in an escalation with Iran. This is if they would choose this path. Also, the U.S. is operating against those Shia militias. So this would.
Does Israel wish that the Americans would perhaps do more when it comes to the threat from Iraq, given as they have more leverage over Iraq?
No, I think we're in sync. I don't think in terms of the Shia militia we have problem of sync with the U.S. The sync is in terms of our offensive in Iran itself, and this is where the U.S. prefers, of course, not to participate in this stage of the war, for sure.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, the IDF has today released details about a raid into southern Syria. It happened a couple of months back, and a Syrian operative who was working on behalf of Iran was captured and brought to Israel. Well, more recently, there was a similar operation to extract a Hezbollah naval expert from Lebanon. A few details about that. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has the details, though, on the Syrian operation for us now.
Another daring Israeli operation deep in Syrian territory. Israeli special forces raided the southern town of Saida in the Daraa governorate, capturing a Syrian national who gathered information on Israeli forces on behalf of Iranian intelligence, the IDF said. The IDF said Al-Asi, a milkman by trade, was part of an Iranian terror network. He was apprehended back in July. In his interrogation in Israel, he described his contacts with Iranian intelligence agents. The publication of the daring operation in Syria comes just days after Israeli commandos captured a senior Hezbollah operative in northern Lebanon. According to Lebanese media, some 20 Navy commandos disguised as Lebanese security forces nabbed Imad Amhaz, believed to be a significant source of knowledge in Hezbollah's naval force.
I got out to the balcony here and I saw movement in the bushes near the sea. Some people were making noise there. I heard someone say, "Go inside, internal security." I don't know if it was said to me or to someone else, but I went inside. We were terrified. They were breaking into the apartment next to ours.
On Sunday, the IDF said it eliminated a senior operative in Hezbollah's aerial unit. And so, as Israel continues to strike Hezbollah from the air and on the ground, it's also going after its sources of knowledge, limiting its ability to regroup. Moving forward.
Well, let's bring back Omar Abu Layla from Deir ez-Zor 24. So, Omar, tell me, this is an extraordinary story. How is it being covered in Syria?
People not surprised, since they know exactly that Israel has strong intelligence and they have real access to any area they wanted just to drop in it or to go to it. So what happened in since the Beja attacks against Hezbollah members, thousands of these pages were bombed suddenly. The people in Syria, they know exactly Israel has a lot of other tools, including to capture leaders, like what happened in Daraa or in El Betron or other recent military operations Israeli conducted. So all the Syrians, not only all the Syrians, expecting many things will happen not only in Syria or in Lebanon, even in Iraq. And this is how it's funny when you see the Iraqi militia, other militia, when they are threatening Israel or other countries, and they know very well, however, they're trying to protect themselves, they are not safe.
All right, thank you, Omar. Stay with us. Doron, just in terms of the legalities involving kidnapping a foreign national, bringing him back to Israel and holding him here for interrogation, how long can he be held? What are the laws surrounding this?
We are at times of war. This is not and we are in the Syria basically is an enemy territory, so in times of war, things like this are quote-unquote illegal. Of course, after they will be interrogated, I don't think they have a point of holding him. It's more like his connection with the Iranian people that were supervising him and sending him to those missions. This is what we have to do, because we also found a few of those networks inside Israel lately. So this is a similar thing on the borders of Syria, and this is, of course, a testimony to the level of the intelligence that we do have, very exact intelligence, and to our special forces capable of operating operating. You have to sneak at night. Nobody should, and do it quietly. And this was done quietly.
Quite a lot of troops involved in that mission.
Yeah, because you have to have the cover, you have to have rescue operation. When you do such an operation, you have to have a lot of layers of reserve for any eventualities. So you have to take into account.
And you have personal experience of this kind of mission, right?
For sure. In '94, under Rabin, today we are commemorating the memory of Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister that was assassinated. And he sent us in the context of hostages. We had this pilot, UNRRA, that was held by Hezbollah leader, by this Mustafa Dirani, and then he sent us to a very, today we do it, back then it was the first time that IDF operated in Baalbek itself, really a few kilometers from Baalbek, in the middle of the night, full of Syrian troops, full of Hezbollah troops, and to succeed to sneak in, take him, bring him to Israel. And he was in Israel under custody for a few years until he was released in some prisoner swap. But we got the information about our pilot, and then we think the fate of our pilot died in captivity, but we had to do this last attempt to try to get the most intelligence, because he was the last one we knew was holding our pilot, Onarad.
Wow, incredible story. Now, Omar, just before you go, as we've just been talking about, Israel and Syria are, of course, two states at war, but President al-Assad seems to want to stay out of this one as much as possible, doesn't he?
I think, he tries, and somehow, we discussed this on the show before, he tries and somehow to remain in the regime or in power, whatever it costs the region. But at the same time, he has huge fear from even the Iranian-backed militia. Especially, we talk about a lot of IRGC leaders or military advisors, as they call them. They were assassinated or killed by the Israelis inside Syria. Just 1 hour ago, the Israelis launched strikes in Damascus, and it might be an IRGC or Hezbollah leader got killed in Al-Sayyidah Zainab. So every couple of hours we hear about these strikes. But Bashar al-Assad trying somehow, I'm aware of this, despite his brother Maher al-Assad, his strong supporter of the IRGC and the Iranian leaders who they on the ground supporting Hezbollah, Iraqi militia, and even other militia who are based in Syria. But I think in the end, he cannot hold it. He will be the weak person in this conflict, because in somehow how much he could try to protect himself, he will lose this battle.
Omar, great to talk to you as always. We appreciate it. Thank you very much. Omar Abu Laila there from Deir ez-Zor 24.
Thank you.
Well, another aspect to this regional conflict, Iranian media is claiming that Iranian and Azerbaijani naval forces took part in combined search and rescue drills in the Caspian Sea. Israel and Azerbaijan have strong partnerships in energy and defence, relationships that have been built up over the past decade or so. The Iranian Navy commander spoke about the drills. Let's take a listen.
God willing, everyone will cooperate with each other to properly establish the security of the maritime economy in this waterway and this very important ocean area in the world, so that, God willing, the countries and the dear people of the countries will continue their lives in peace and comfort.
Well, another Hezbollah drone made it into Israeli airspace earlier today, but was downed over the western Galilee region. The terrorist group fired a barrage of rockets at northern Israel this morning, and the IDF revealed the existence of yet another tunnel it said was designed to facilitate raids on Israel. We'll talk with Zach about that in a bit more detail in a moment. But first, let's head up to northern Israel. Our Nicole Zedek is standing by. Nicole, a lot going on over the past 24 hours. Just bring us up to date.
Another active day here on the northern border, Laura. As you mentioned, some of those projectiles fired from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. We've seen more than 60 projectiles fired towards the north throughout the course of the day. Now, the majority of that was actually this morning in two major rocket barrages towards the upper Galilee region. We saw two separate 30 barrages of rockets fired earlier this morning. Now, not that long after that, a few hours ago, actually, here in Kiryat Shmona, we saw the most recent barrage, and this is when sirens rang out in Ramot Naftali. From where we are, we saw about 10 Iron Dome interceptions shooting down some of those projectiles in the air. Now, over the course of all of these different activity happening, no reports of any injuries or any damage, as the IDF says that they have been able to successfully intercept the majority of those projectiles, and if not, they fall in some open areas. Same with the drone that you mentioned that we saw earlier in the day as well. Sirens sounding on the west coast in the Haria, but the IDF says that they were able to successfully down that drone as well. So that's what we're seeing here on the Israeli side. But then on the Lebanese side, the most recent operation for the ground maneuver for Israeli troops inside southern Lebanon, the IDF says they're operating right near the border fence. And this is an area with very thick wooded terrain. And inside this thick wooded terrain, the IDF says that they have found different Hezbollah terror infrastructure, large weapons caches, even some missile manufacturing facilities as well as different underground facilities. And these specific underground compounds, according to the IDF, are compounds that Hezbollah operatives would have used if they were to infiltrate into Israeli territory. So the IDF was able to find these different Hezbollah terror infrastructures right there along the border, possibly preventing a possible future infiltration by Hezbollah terror operatives. And it's really these operations that the IDF says is so crucial right now, right there along the border, to bring back the safety for many of the residents here on the northern border and eliminate that risk of a possible invasion, infiltration in the future. So that's really what the IDF is operating on right now with the ground operation in southern Lebanon.
Nicole, thank you very much indeed for that update. Nicole Zedek, they're up in the north of Israel. Doron Avital and Zach Andrews still with me in the studio. And Zach, you've been spending a lot of time in the northern border area. You've also crossed into Lebanon twice, and you have seen with your own eyes these huge tunnels that Hezbollah was using. It would suggest to carry out an atrocity like October 7th.
First, I'm glad that Nicole's up there tonight, because that drive up, it does get tiring after a while. It's nice to see her up there. This was actually my third time in with the IDF in the last 2 weeks. 2 of those trips in at night, and we couldn't catch our bearings, so we didn't know exactly where we were, able to figure it out after the fact, taking us inside some of these Hezbollah tunnels. The complexity of the manufacturing process, you can still see some of the chipped marks in the soil, in the rock from the drill bits that they were using, rebar along the edges, and sprayed concrete. Sprayed concrete, too, was a sign. I think we see in the Gazan tunnels with Hamas a lot of prefab or manufactured cement blocks that they, like cinder blocks that they lay on the edges of the tunnels. Here it's sprayed concrete. That's a process that involves some pretty professional guys that know what they're doing. Be able to get that equipment in there, and you have to have a large enough working space to be able to do that. Heard a lot of speculation about, man, they must have had help, they must have had some sort of assistance.
And how old are these tunnels? How long have they been there in the IDF's estimation?
The IDF thinks that some of these tunnels, the fact that they carved out the earth there could be decades old. Wow. But the newer process where they've, I mean, the skilled craftsmanship that we saw with the electrical work and the fact that they put together, and I regret that our video is still under embargo, otherwise we would show you some of this video.
We will have your report up soon.
Yeah, I'm told. But the thing that struck me the most after seeing the complexity of it and knowing how much effort they put into it, knowing how much investment goes into these facilities, why, when the IDF rolled into certain segments of this tunnel or breached and got in, did they only encounter 5, 10, a dozen or so Hezbollah men fighting back? Why was there not a more staunch defense? And I think the only conclusion, based on the conversations that we're having with some of the soldiers in there, is that either they have overbuilt this tunnel network, and so they can lose segments of it, they can lose these frontline segments, and it's not a massive impact to their defensive posture because they still have a deep tunnel network that's going to run deeper inside Lebanese territory, or they couldn't put up a fight to defend their best investment, the closest tunnel access points to the Israeli border. Why did they not put up a stronger fight? I think that's the thing that we probably won't know the answer for a long time, but I do feel that's the key to where this war is going, what the fight with Hezbollah looks like, because if they couldn't, one, if they couldn't put up a fight, or 2, if they chose not to put up a fight and defend these
in southern Lebanon,
in these tunnel access points that are literally stone's throw away from the Israeli border, there's something here that shows that they are just decimated as a fighting force right now, and they cannot collect a positive defense.
And we've been hearing reports of them surrendering en masse as well. Doron, I just want to ask you, because at the end of last week, everybody was talking about a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, the American envoys were here and all the rest of it. Do you think that that is still on the cards? And are you concerned about Israeli troops getting bogged down in Lebanon for a long time now?
No, I think it's in the cards. The question in what timetables ahead. I think, as you pointed out, I think the Hezbollah lost much of its spirit, fighting spirit, and the killing of this leadership. The leadership really caused a lot of damage, and also our attacks from the air and so on, and our incursion into Lebanon. This, I think, in terms of the Lebanon operation, the IDF really operated in the fashion that we remember. This is not like the first days in Gaza. A lot of preparation.
Yeah, you see differences, do you?
Of course. We were much more prepared. We had time to prepare, to organize, to learn the terrain, to put plans in place, to do all those. There were, like, I think, 70 or more incursions of special forces before the major maneuvering of the ground troops, and then the intelligence and the use of the connection between the ground troops and the Air Force. So in terms of military campaign, it's a very good military campaign. And I think we pushed them away, and I think their strategy right now in Hezbollah is to reconsider and to reach a ceasefire in whatever fashion they can in order to regroup or think about their future. But we would have to agree to it only if our conditions are met, and our condition is basically, as was stated by everyone, that until the Litani border, it has to be free from Hezbollah.
When do you think that the residents will be able to move home?
Well, this is tricky, because we saw the last few days ago, a few of our residents got killed, so it's not that simple.
It's still very dangerous up there.
Yeah, there's still. So I think they would, if there's a ceasefire that we feel that is really working for us, then we might think to bring them back.
Real quick, Zach.
Real quick, just the battle space itself, I think it was the most remarkable element is that there are no civilians, none that we can account of in this battle space. Sure. That's not something you even find on the front lines of Ukraine anymore. But the fact that the civilians have completely fled, it's just Hezbollah and the Israeli soldiers.
Yeah, fascinating. And Zach, you'll be back up in the north again soon. Thank you very much indeed, Doron. You staying with us. Time for a short break. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Welcome back. Several people have been arrested in connection with an investigation into the alleged leak of classified documents from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. The judge in the case said the leaks harmed efforts to achieve the goals of the war in the Gaza Strip. More in this report.
A suspected leak of classified Gaza documents from the Prime Minister's office has rocked Israeli politics and outraged hostage families. According to partially released court filings, several officials working in Benjamin Netanyahu's office were arrested for sharing top-secret information with foreign media outlets aimed at politically benefiting Netanyahu, who denies any wrongdoing. A fifth suspect, an IDF officer, was also arrested.
This is not a case of suspected leaks, but rather profiteering with state secrets for political purposes. The use of raw intelligence material for campaign purposes requires an investigation and a thorough examination to determine whether sensitive security information was stolen and used as a tool for political survival. This is not just a criminal offense. It is a national crime.
The leaked documents are the basis for a widely discredited article in the London-based Jewish Chronicle, which was later withdrawn, suggesting Hamas had planned to remove hostages out of Gaza through Egypt, as well as an article in Germany's Bild newspaper, claiming Hamas was dragging out hostage talks as a form of psychological warfare.
Here is an instruction document that was found in the tunnel of senior Hamas officials by our soldiers. Our soldiers found it. By the way, the media said it was Sinwar. I cannot guarantee that it was Sinwar, but I guarantee that it was senior Hamas officials. Here is the original document in Arabic, and here is its translation.
This affair originated in the Prime Minister's office, and the investigation needs to determine whether it was not under the Prime Minister's orders. If Netanyahu knew, he is complicit in one of the most serious security breaches on record. If Netanyahu did not know, then what does he know?
The primary suspect is Eli Feldstein, a spokesperson working with the Prime Minister's office, despite failing to obtain the necessary security clearance. According to the court filings, the leaks could have hurt efforts to release the hostages held in Gaza and potentially expose intelligence sources.
We're fighting for almost 400 days. We want to know that the people that make decisions do it as well, that are doing the right thing, the only thing that needs to bring them home, nothing else that will want help to this goal.
Well, our Emmanuelle Honorat is down at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, and she joins us now. And Emmanuelle, as we heard there, this has been described as one of the most serious leaks in Israeli history. It is particularly upsetting for the families of the hostages, isn't it?
Well, as you said, this was one of the most serious leaks, and mostly for national security reasons. Now, of course, national security reasons today really just imply the hostage negotiations, and as the court in Rishon LeZion, a suburb just south of Tel Aviv, declared that this leak actually probably harmed these hostage negotiations. And as you can see behind me, the hostage protests are still going on in full swing. It's now over a year that hostage families and people supporting the deal are coming out in order to call for the return of all 101 hostages. Now, the IDF and the Shin Bet opened this investigation shortly after they saw the publication of details from this leak in 2 European media outlets. Now, that is what was the main concern of this leak was that it had reached foreign media outlets, and one of them being the German Bild and the British Jewish Chronicle. Now, both of these media outlets, both of these articles alleged that Hamas did not want to reach a deal in order to inflict more psychological terror on Israelis and sow more division in the Israeli government. And the article that was since retracted from the Jewish Chronicle alleged that now assassinated Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar that there was a plan for him to escape Gaza to Iran with hostages as some kind of security. Now, I can't hear you anymore, Laura, so I'm just going to throw it back to you, back into the studio.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Emmanuel on aura down with some of the families of the hostages who you can see are protesting close to the headquarters of the IDF. Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital is with us in the studio. So, Doron, this could be, these allegations are very serious indeed, but this really goes to the heart of intelligence being leaked to the press. Now, it appears it wasn't false intelligence, it was real intelligence, but it should never have made its way to the media. Is that right?
So this is a serious affair that can escalate to the political arena and create a havoc in Israeli politics. Let's see, I'm not sure, but it can be a serious affair. You know, when you have an intelligence asset, there's a point in which you have to use it, and this when you are wasting it in some sense, but you get some cause. It serves some cause, okay? Say
for the good of the country.
For the good of the country, for military
party.
Purposes and so on. So this is also the dilemma in intelligence. But when you waste intelligence assets for PR purposes or for political manipulation inside the country or political manipulation outside of the country, then you have a problem. Even when we talk about the Iraq war and about the way the intelligence was used in order to justify a war in Iraq. So this is when intelligence serves political purpose in this way, on top of the head of the military echelon. I mean, it's not that the military with the political leadership decide to use this asset in a certain way, but the political echelon is using it in a certain way. And the question is, of course, the complicity of Bibi Netanyahu. Of course, he would try to distance himself and say that this is an initiative of his inner circle. But if he is associated with this, then this might be a political bombshell.
Is this related to the dispute between Prime Minister Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant?
First of all, if people that follow Bibi through the years, there's always tension between him and his military, the military mechanism, because basically the military was always center-left, center-right, but never part of the position that he takes politically. This is inherent tension in Israel. The military is always more to the left than the political leaders. But since the war, it's become more and more divisive. With Gallant, for example, with the head of his own minister that he tried to fire at least twice and didn't succeed. So the military is doing their job, in this case, serving his case that he's defending in Israel. But on the other hand, there's a big tension between him and them. Sure.
Right, we'll have to wait and see how this one evolves. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital there. A string of human rights violations in Iran now. A Jewish Iranian man was hanged this morning. 20-year-old Arvin Nathaniel Gahrimani had been convicted of murder but was allegedly defending himself against a knife attack back in 2022. And activists say his trial was significantly flawed. Well, last week, Iran executed German-Iranian national Jamshid Sharmat, and there are now fears for a young female student, Ahu Daryeh, who Amnesty International says was violently arrested after she stripped off, reportedly in protest at Iran's strict Islamic dress code. We're here to talk about all of that. We're joined by Daria Safai. She's an author and human rights activist, a member of the Belgian Chamber of Representatives, and herself a former political prisoner in Iran. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Member Daria. So before we get into the specifics of each case, do you think that Iran is cranking up the repression of people at home because it is feeling cornered militarily, primarily by Israel?
Of course, this is the only reason. Every time we see that if they are frustrated and powerless, by doing something against Israel, they are cracking down on the people inside Iran. The reason is psychologically to show the people, the Iranian, that they have still the control, they have the power, that they didn't lose the war. But still, it shows only how frustrated, how hopeless they are. Just killing Sharmat, killing Armin today, it shows how disappointed, how powerless they are against Israel, and still they want to show the people that they have every control of everything. So that's how also we see that now Ahu Daryai, the student who has gone naked through the streets in the university, at the university, they took her. She's now disappeared. We don't even know where she is, just for putting the people under pressure and make them afraid of their monster face. That's why they killed also the innocent Armin, which has done nothing more than a self-defense. And that's how they are working such a long time in Iran.
So these moves are more about terrorizing the Iranian people rather than any message on the world stage. Do you think that any or all of these cases could provoke an uprising against the regime, as we saw, of course, with Mahsa Amini back in 2022?
What we have seen in the history is that we can never say when is the last moment of pressure to show up such a big, massive demonstration and manifestation of the Iranian people. There is a point of returning, and this point has already been there. Now what the next step is just seeing when is the next time that they decide to come to the streets and say enough is enough. But the problem is every time they do it, because they have done it such a long time, in this 45 years, even when I was in Iran in 1999, I was on the streets of Tehran to say no to this regime. But every time they do such a thing, they are ignored by the world. And the world doesn't do the things that they need to be, that it needs to be done for supporting these people. So that's how they kill the Ayatollahs, they kill the Iranian people, they put them under pressure. And after last time, they were like 4 months, days and nights on the streets. In place of putting the pressure on this regime, what did the Western countries? They did. They just making negotiations with Iranian regime. They just giving them the legitimacy to sit at the table. And this is not how it's going to work. So I hope next time that the people, Iranian people, are on the streets, which it can be tomorrow, it can be next week, that they have the total support of the whole world. That's what they need.
Well, Germany did respond quite robustly following the execution of Jamshid Sharmat, who held German citizenship. They closed 6 Iranian consulates in Germany. Do you think other European countries might take a stronger stance, including Belgium? And what would you like to see those countries do to support Iranian dissidents?
I hope so, because there is no other way to show Iran who has the power here. The only language that Iranian country, that Iranian regime, Islamic regime of Iran, the only language that they understand is the language of power. That's how I think always Israel has the control on them, because they know how to talk with these monsters. They know that the only thing that they see and understand, are afraid of, is showing your power, but not through the negotiation. Of course, Germany has taken several steps, but first of all, it is too late. We have seen that Sharmat was such a long time there. They should have done it before, and still I don't see any other reaction from other countries. It's not enough. I mean, if you do it after the death of someone, and then after some months is still everything is solved, this is not the way to let them know that they should stop the execution, they should stop the violation of women's rights and human rights, and they should stop making a nuclear bomb, which is a threat for not only Israel, which doesn't have the right to exist, but the whole world. They are helping Russia against Europe. That's what they are doing, and still Europe doesn't take any what it is needed to be done. Like, for example, a simple example is just putting the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard of Islamic Republic, put it on the terror list of the Europe. At least this is a signal to show the regime that we don't bear what they are doing.
They're still reluctant to do that, aren't they? Daria, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Daria Safai there.
Hi.
Turkey stripped 3 pro-Kurdish mayors of their posts in towns in the southeast of the country and appointed state officials to their posts. Instead, all belonged to the pro-Kurdish DEM party, which has 57 seats in the national parliament. They were removed for convictions and charges on terrorism-related offences. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Sinan Sidi. He's a senior fellow on Turkey at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, the FDD. Great to have you with us, Sinan. So, what exactly happened here? How can these mayors be just stripped of their powers in this way?
That's a great question. I mean, because it can, and Erdogan has been doing this not for the first time. It's happened several times in the last few electoral cycles, where you have democratically elected mayors of certain cities and towns, but predominantly in the Kurdish provinces, summarily removed and replaced with loyalists from Erdogan's own sort of either party or state officials as caretakers, simply because Erdogan wants to rein them in historically. Now, in this case, we've got these elected mayors being removed from Kurdish provinces, but we also saw a similar case in Istanbul, a district of Istanbul, last week, when an elected mayor was removed from office and replaced with a caretaker. So again, this is Erdogan's overreach in terms of power.
Well, people are not happy about this, are they? And we have seen some protests already in the cities involved.
Yeah, I've just been watching some of those. I mean, obviously, there's been police deployed, so a lot of people, protesters being dragged through the streets, some by their hair, and then we've seen sort of police intervention in what are essentially peaceful protests, just outlandishly, essentially protesting, the removal of democratically elected mayors. And it's Erdogan's intention for the last few weeks has supposedly been to open a new Kurdish peace process and engage the Kurds to sort of see if they could find a resolution to an ongoing conflict that has divided the country for over 40 years. But with actions like this, I don't understand how Erdogan seeks to essentially, build bridges with the Kurdish political movement, because he's compromising the democratically elected people of the will. He's not recognizing it. It doesn't bode well. But also, Erdogan thought he could count on the support of Kurdish parliamentarians because he wants to change Turkey's constitution to allow him to change a bunch of articles, not least of which is to allow Erdogan to gain another term of office in power.
Which, of course, he's barred to do currently under the constitution. How is this linked then to a recent proposal by one of his allies, which you just alluded to, in which Erdogan seems to be moving towards some kind of settlement with the PKK and with the Kurdish independence movement?
Right. So Erdogan wants to engage the PKK, and he's already started talking to Abdullah Öcalan, leader of the PKK, who's been in prison for a while. And he seems to be betting on the fact, as far as we can tell, that he can negotiate directly with the PKK and Öcalan for a political solution, and whilst that is going on, Erdogan feels that he can target the actual democratic movement, Kurdish movement in parliament, and that Öcalan will not essentially raise his voice against that because he's more interested in dealing directly with Erdogan. I don't think this is a winning strategy, because the DEM party, the Kurdish party in parliament, is the major force that essentially has the political momentum and movement within it in parliament. But that being said, Öcalan is still the figurehead for a lot of Kurdish supporters. So Erdogan thinks he can have his cake and eat it at the same time, essentially. And this sort of arrest of Kurdish mayors, as you can sort of see in these towns, I think it's more targeted at sort of showing Turkey, sort of Erdogan's voters, that he's getting tough on quote unquote terrorism. But it really looks like a power grab, and really solidifying his power grab positions in Turkey's Kurdish provinces. Fascinating.
Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it, Dr. Sinan Sidi there. A court in Tunisia has sentenced a woman to 4.5 years in prison for sharing, quote, obscene content on social media. 4 other people are also set to stand trial. This under a new law that targets online content that the government deems in conflict with social values. Critics, though, say it's just the latest crackdown on personal freedoms by President Kais Saied. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Mike Sexton. He's a senior policy advisor for cyber and AI at the Third Way National Security Programme. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Mike. It's very subjective, isn't it? Content that conflicts with social values, because of course everybody has different ideas about social values. Is this a trend now in autocratic countries? Police the platforms, go after the individuals rather than ban the platforms altogether?
Yes, I think you are absolutely right. It's impossible to tell from the public reporting what exactly is meant by this obscenity. Was this some sort of child exploitation that, would be defensible? But there have been no details released. And so we have no idea. There's no transparency about what these people have been charged with exactly. What were their identities have not been disclosed, so no one can check this. So it's a really tragic case of a lack of transparency and a law that flies in the face of freedom of speech. And we have absolutely seen these kinds of laws being used in the past by other governments to silence journalists. Again, in this case, we really have no idea what this could actually be about.
And social media has an important role in the history of Tunisia, of course. Tunisia is where the Arab uprisings, the Arab Spring began. Social media played a role in getting people together to turn out and protest against the regime. Do you think there's a sense that the authorities were caught off guard back then, and there's no way they're prepared to let that happen again?
Yeah, well, it's in the eye of the perceiver, I think, whether the governments are prepared for that kind of an uprising or not. But I think it's absolutely certain that they are much more prepared than they were during the Arab Spring in 2011, when they really were caught, on their back feet. In response to a sort of popular uprising on social media, which they had not considered could have this kind of a political effect. Now, that is no longer a black swan event. That is something that these governments do anticipate and plan for. But unfortunately, just because of free press restrictions within these countries, it's very difficult to document, really, with any good granularity exactly what they are doing, what laws they are using, how many people they are prosecuting in order to suppress this kind of speech.
And of course, it's not just autocratic countries where there's no free media. The United States has debated banning TikTok. People in the United Kingdom were recently jailed for tweets. Do you think we're entering a new phase in government control of social media, and how do we navigate that?
Yeah, it's a big question, and those are 2 other cases with very different reasons for regulating social media. In the case of the United States and TikTok, I think there's one concern about the content, which can be quite extremist and offensive. But there is also the consideration, really, that is much more important, I believe, that it is the algorithms that there's no transparency into. And so the United States government perceives that and says, look, it's unacceptable to have, young adults who get news from TikTok for about an hour a day or more as their primary news source, and we have no visibility into why these algorithms seem to never bring up any videos about Uyghurs or Tibetans or border disputes with India. It is always other political issues that conveniently happen to be in confluence with Chinese foreign policy objectives.
Interesting. All right, great to talk to you, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. Mike Sexton there.
Thanks, you too.
And finally, for many years now, Egypt has been deprived of some of its most significant ancient artifacts. Well, one man is on a mission to end that. The Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass is taking on the world's big museums. More in this report.
Prominent Egyptian archaeologist and former Antiquities Minister Zahi Hawass has launched a petition for the return of the pharaonic bust of Queen Nefertiti from the Neues Museum in Berlin back to Egypt. Nefertiti's famous painted limestone bust was uncovered at Tel El Amarna, around 300 kilometers south of Cairo, in 1912 by German archaeologists, shipping it to Berlin a year later. Amarna was the capital city of Egypt at the time of Nefertiti's husband, 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten, who reigned until about 1335 BC. Akhenaten, called the heretic king, was notorious for promoting the worship of the god Aten to the exclusion of Egypt's other gods. His reign also introduced a radical change in Egyptian art. In his petition launched on Saturday, Hawass asked for the return of the bust, saying it was removed from Egypt illegally after its discovery.
This is the national committee, is not a government committee, to ask for the return of the bust of Nefertiti back. And this is the letter. What I need from everyone here is to go to my website. You will only open the website, hawazzahi.com, and you will sign one signature to show that you really love this bust to come back.
Hawass added that he will not be calling for the repatriation of artifacts that were taken out of Egypt legally.
I think it's time now, year 2024, 2025 should be the year that the African countries and the civilizations of others, artifacts should come back again. I am not asking for the artifacts in museums to come back. I'm asking only for 3 main beautiful objects.
These objects are the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum, the bust of Nefertiti, and the Zodiac from the Louvre. The museums are yet to comment.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of Middle East Now. Many thanks for watching, and do stay with us on I24 News. Benita Levin is up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips. whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
On today's program, just a few hours left for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to convince voters they are best suited to lead the United States for the next 4 years. The Democrat vice president and Republican former president make their final push in battleground states ahead of voting day. We're live in Washington. Iran vows to use all its resources in its next attack on Israel, saying it plans to use more powerful warheads than any used in its previous direct strikes. Will American warnings make a difference to Tehran? Will Israel act first? We speak to a security expert. And a shocking scandal in Israel, the apparent leak of sensitive security information linked to the war. 5 suspects arrested so far as part of investigations into the breach in Benjamin Netanyahu's office. 4 of them are soldiers linked to an intelligence unit. We take you to Defense Headquarters for the latest. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Benisa Levine. Security developments in Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria and Israel amidst concerns that tensions in the Middle East could spike even further. Much speculation around Iran's next moves following blistering rhetoric from the supreme leader on the weekend. Chances of a hostage deal look slim 395 days into the war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. And in the United States, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris telling potential voters in Michigan, as president, she will do everything in her power to end the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump has reportedly told Benjamin Netanyahu he wants Israel to wrap up the war in Gaza by the time he returns to office if he wins the election. The Republican leader had previously said the war would not have happened on his watch. So we start our show with updates on the eve of one of the most consequential elections in U.S. history. We go live to senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from outside the White House in Washington. Good to see you, Mike. The big question on the eve of voting day, of course, who will be sitting inside that Oval Office behind you come January? The race is too tight to call. All eyes, of course, on those battleground states. What is the atmosphere like right now in D.C.? What is the latest?
what's the atmosphere like? There's nobody that has any fingernails left. Nobody has any sanity left either. That's what the atmosphere is like here. All 7 battleground states all polling within the margin of error, which means it's simply a toss-up at this point. Any which way you turn in the country right now, that's the atmosphere that we're facing. Just complete uncertainty at the moment about what's to come tomorrow and in the coming days after that. Keep in mind, we might not know the result of this election tomorrow night. Likely won't. Trickling into Wednesday, possibly Thursday for places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Nevada, who count provisional ballots and contested ballots. This could go on for a few days, just like it did in 2020. So the atmosphere here right now is certainly one of uncertainty, the unknown, everybody trying to make last-minute preparations, and everybody doing what they can to whatever their area is right now in the Harris campaign, in the Trump campaign, to try to drive out that vote, whether it's messaging, whether it's on-the-ground operations, whether it's in the digital realm, doesn't matter. Everybody looking right now at those 7 battleground states, every vote counts here down the home stretch.
Certainly is going to be fascinating. Much more to come from our senior U.S. correspondent, of course, in the coming days. For now, thank you so much, Mike Wagenheim, live from the White House in Washington. Thanks, Mike. Now, for more, still in Washington, we welcome Dan Raviz, co-author of Spies Against Armageddon, Inside Israel's Secret Wars. He's also in D.C. Dan, good to see you too. You, of course, have covered many elections in the U.S., many dramatic developments in this campaign. President Joe Biden eventually calling it quits. Of course, Kamala Harris hoping to make history as the first female U.S. president, and then Donald Trump, of course, surviving 2 assassination attempts. What a road to get here. Tell us more, your insights.
That's right. It's a dramatic setup to an election where, as Mike reported, we have no idea which of the candidates is going to win. It's apparently very close in those 7 decisive states, but I'm especially thinking about the fact that Joe Biden wanted to run for re-election until his awful performance in a debate in late June. So in late July, he stood aside, and Kamala Harris, as vice president, became the Democratic Party candidate. And frankly, she wasn't that well known across the country. So in general, Democrats, liberals, and the polls indicate women, especially because of the abortion issue, are favoring Kamala Harris. Donald Trump, well, he's the Donald Trump we know. He's saying everything possible negative about Kamala, the worst vice president ever, making promises to reduce inflation, make the economy more healthy. And so American voters face a decision. Someone they know, Donald Trump, but a lot of people don't like him, some do, and Kamala Harris, whom they don't know very well, but some of them consider her the savior to prevent Trump from becoming president again, Benita.
And of course, Republicans and Democrats scrambling to get supporters to the polls. And as you say, the electorate is still so divided, both nationally and, of course, in those battleground states. It's down to the wire. So what happens in the coming hours?
Well, there is campaigning by both candidates. Both Trump and Harris are on the road. Harris is focusing on Pennsylvania. A lot of electoral votes are there. Keep in mind that in every state, whoever gets the most votes gets all the electoral votes of that state. So up north, we have Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. To the south, we have Georgia and North Carolina. In the southwest, we have Nevada and Arizona. So that's where the focus is. So what if Donald Trump were to win each of those states by 1 vote or 100 votes? It would look like a landslide for Trump. Or Harris could score that. That's another reason that the vote count will be so careful, we may not know the result for days, again, as Mike indicated.
And of course, when it comes specifically to U.S. policy on the Middle East, and it seems some of the messaging has varied depending on the crowd or the state, and many Israelis watching are concerned about the future security relationship between Washington and Jerusalem down the line. Paint a picture for us.
Right. I can understand why a lot of Israelis, including U.S. citizens who have mailed in their ballots, took part in the vote, apparently overwhelmingly for Trump, because that's someone they know who appeared to be pro-Israel, right? Moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and arranging the Abraham Accords, in which Arab countries of the Gulf and Morocco recognized Israel. So Israelis like that. There are a lot of skeptics who say, we don't know what Trump would be like in another third term. He's very unreliable and unpredictable. Kamala Harris intends to be the usual kind of Democrat, but she's been critical of how Israel has conducted the Gaza war. So, as you reported, Benita, she's indicated that she wants that war to end. She will work on that. She's saying that largely to Arab American voters in the state of Michigan, but to Jewish voters in states like Pennsylvania, she's underlining that, like Joe Biden, she'll still be a friend of Israel.
And Dan, of course, hopefully a smooth process throughout, whatever the result, but there could be legal challenges, claims of irregularities, protests. Your sense?
Yeah, there's sure to be. Members of both parties say that they've hired thousands of lawyers in all of the 50 states ready for various challenges. And the general feeling is that if Donald Trump is declared the loser in any particular state, his lawyers are certain to claim, just as he did after the 2020 election, that there was something fishy going on, something illegitimate. So even if we have a winner declared in a few days by the news media, supporters of Trump may not accept it if he loses. Democrats also are ready to complain about any irregularities. And in a country that is so divided, and that's the way the United States is right now, I'm sad to say that even election results may not achieve a consensus of agreement.
Well, we certainly will be watching. The whole world is watching. For now, thank you so much. As always, appreciate your insights. Dan Raviv, live from Washington. Be well. Now, Iran is today vowing to use all its resources in its next attack on Israel. Officials saying they are planning to use more powerful warheads than those in its previous direct strikes. And that's despite American warnings against a counter-attack. Israel targeted Iranian military sites in its retaliatory attack on Iran at the end of last month, weeks after Tehran had launched 181 missiles at Israel. More in this report by our Jodina Tilowitz.
In response to Israeli strikes on Iranian military targets, Tehran may be planning a counterattack that will use more powerful warheads and other weapons not used in previous attacks. According to media reports which cited Iranian and Arab officials, the response to Israel will be, quote, strong and complex, as a reprisal for the loss of 4 soldiers and a civilian in an Israeli strike on the Islamic Republic just over 1 week ago. Reports indicating that the response could come this week and that Iraqi territory may be used to launch projectiles.
The patterns of our response to the aggressions of the Zionist regime are clear, and at the same time it is natural that we should use all our material and spiritual resources to respond to the aggressions of the Zionist regime. And in this context, we will use all our resources with all our might.
Israel said that its airstrikes on October 26th knocked out Iran's air defenses and missile production capabilities and were a response to Tehran's October 1st launching of almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel.
Iran is trying to harm Israel. It starts from Gaza and through Lebanon and continues to Yemen and Iraq and other places, and in all of these places we are stopping and striking them.
Since the strikes last month, Israel and the U.S. have warned Iran against retaliating, with the U.S. deploying B-52 bombers in the region. But according to reports, Khamenei felt obliged to issue a retaliation order because of the extent of the damage caused by the multi-hour attack.
The continuation and strengthening of this American presence creates more tension, and it will definitely not deter our resolve to defend ourselves.
At the same time, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said on Sunday that a possible ceasefire between Israel and Iran's allies, Hamas and Hezbollah, could affect the intensity of Tehran's promised onslaught.
And now for more on the latest security developments. It's a pleasure to welcome to studio Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast The Lapin Assessment on Patreon and a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and Jewish News Syndicate, and our correspondent Zach Anders. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. Much on the go, a crucial time across the world. Iran issuing a clear threat once again, Yaakov, to Israel. Warnings out of the US. What happens next? Is Israel going to act first?
Well, we can't rule anything out, and it's not really possible, in my opinion, to get into the heads of Iranian decision makers. Their logic is not our logic, but what we can do is look at capabilities. And I think that Iran fired its very best missiles already on the 1st of October, the 2nd of October, Imad missiles and Khadr missiles. These are the best ballistic missiles that Iran has, the finest that their industry can produce. Some of these are very fast, some of these are precise, and they can maneuver in the atmosphere. And most of them were shot down by Israeli and allied air defenses. And so when Iran issues these threats, I think we have to keep a sense of proportion. Now, according to various assessments, Iran has already fired in total the April attack and October attack, something like 400 missiles. And they were estimated by some research groups in the West to have a total of almost 1,000 before this entire direct clash began. So they have, according to these estimates, and we can't confirm them, but these are estimates, several hundred missiles left. It's not an endless supply. Now, what we have to factor in also is that their air defenses are down, and their ability to produce ballistic missiles is severely disrupted because of the last Israeli strike across Iran. And so strategically, they are in an inferior position to Israel, much worse than they were going into this. And I think we have to keep those factors in mind. That doesn't tell us what they're going to do, but it tells us what they stand to lose if they make a mistake and go too far now.
And when there are reports out of Iran saying the strike on Israel will be the largest in quantity and quality so far, by your assessment, that simply isn't true.
Well, I think that, again, in terms of the types of missiles that they have fired their very best. Now, can they try to fire larger volleys? They can try. It's very difficult to fire larger volleys because you have to fuel up a lot of these missiles. They require solid fuel. That's preparations in advance. And according to recent reports, one of their launch bases, missile launch bases, was also hit, the very one that was used to attack Israel on the 2nd of October. So there are a lot of unknowns here. They can launch another attack on Israel, and they can try and focus their missiles on very sensitive sites. There's no question about that. But I think what we have to factor in here is that most of their missiles will be intercepted, whereas right now, every Israeli munition that will be fired in their direction will very likely hit its target. So we are in an inherently asymmetric situation in Israel's favor. They're very aware of that. Again, that doesn't tell us what they're going to do. I'm humble about their intentions. I don't think we can get into their heads. But if they make this mistake, this is actually an opportunity for Israel to go after Iran's nuclear program. And I think that the Iranians are aware of that. So we'll see how they're going to proceed.
Zach, we were just talking to our colleague Mike Wagenheim in Washington, Dan Raviv as well. We know, obviously, the focus on what is going to happen in the election voting day tomorrow. How would the result there impact exactly what Yaakov is describing, potential moves out of Tehran and a potential preemptive strike by Israel?
That's a good question. I don't know that we're going to see the regime approach the election night and the aftermath of the election in any particular way. But certainly they're watching to see which candidate succeeds and what the relationship is going to be like, especially how the force posture of the United States and its assets are going to be deployed. We know that former President Trump would be willing to go after Iranian leaders and Qasem Soleimani. The main thing to look out for, though, in the coming days, if there is to be a potential Iranian attack, I agree 100% with the assessment. I think that there's still room for a wild card. I don't know what that is, but I don't think that they go on another endeavor like this without trying something new, trying something different. And I would be concerned, especially if I'm an Israeli war planner at this point, and I'm sitting here on the defensive, I would be very concerned that Iran has now established a lot of credible intelligence based on the previous two attacks. They know what succeeded, they know what failed, and in the next attack, they can potentially hone in their efforts on a specific point. I know that we talk about there's a lot of potential targets that are on their list, like there was last time, multiple bases and outside of Tel Aviv, and we saw them rain down across the country. I would be more concerned about the same size of attack, the same number of ballistic missiles, but honed in on one place, one location, because we know that the air defense and the aerial defense network is trying to defend this entire country. And because it's trying to defend this entire country, there are some limits. There are some areas where it's not going to be the most robust protection. Obviously, the protection is enveloping Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to protect life. But you look at some of these military bases when the IDF is going to, or the Israeli Air Force is going to send their jets up and have them be in the air so none of those planes can be damaged on the ground in the moments leading up to an attack. But at the same time, you've got personnel on those bases, you've got a large station deployment of soldiers anywhere around these military sites. If Iran is really trying to punch hard, I would be very concerned that they try and hone in on one place with the same level and style of attack, but just overwhelm, make it impossible for the air defenses to intercept everything.
As you said, it's difficult to ascertain what is going on in the head of leaders and decision makers in Iran right now. But if there were to be some level of a ceasefire, some kind of common ground achieved across the northern front, potentially in Gaza as well, which is clearly a long way off. But if that were to happen, how would that impact potential strikes out of Iran right now?
Well, they've said, that in that kind of scenario that will temper their planned attack. And I think a lot of this is signaling that it's designed to, A, make Iran credible in the eyes of what's left of its axis, which is really just absorbed so many severe blows. Hamas is off the board essentially as a regional proxy. Hezbollah is a shadow of its former self. They have their militias in Syria. They have their militias in Iraq. They've got the Houthis in Yemen. And they've got, their home population, which is watching very, very closely. I think at the end of the day, what's worth noting is that a direct state-on-state conflict is the last thing that the Iranians actually wanted. The whole reason that they built this proxy warfare strategy is to be able to encircle and attack Israel until it collapses in their sick ideological vision, and to have the proxies do the dirty work for them. They wanted to fight Israel until the last Palestinian, the last Lebanese, the last Yemenite. Now they're facing state-on-state conflict, and they are, again, in the inferior position. So yes, they can do damage, but what happens after that? They have no air defenses. Their nuclear program is completely vulnerable. Their oil installations are vulnerable. This can actually undermine the regime's very stability. So I think that they will be factoring all of this in, and they will be looking for, some kind of way to attack without endangering their existence. Again, I don't want to get into their heads because too many people have tried to get into the heads of Islamists and failed. So I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is that when you match the capability, state on state, missile per missile, they have no air force. The Israeli Air Force can take over Iran's skies and reach anywhere in Iran. There's nothing they can do about that. And they learned about that on the 26th of October. It's much better to be in Israel's shoes in this confrontation.
Let's see if lessons have indeed been learned. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to discuss. But right now, let's go live to our correspondent, Nicole Zedek. She's joining us from northern Israel. And Nicole, much on the go across that front. The IDF strike taking out 2 Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon, including the chief of the elite Radwan Forces anti-tank missile unit. What else can you tell us? What update can you share?
Yes, this chief of the Radwan Forces anti-tank missile unit, this is a man who's been terrorizing not only northern Israel for more than a year at this point, and also planning numerous attacks on northern Israel even before that, but also troops inside southern Lebanon, conducting different anti-tank guided missile attacks on those troops as well. And so this elimination, very significant, as well as another airstrike that took out another senior Hezbollah member that was responsible for transferring weapons to different Hezbollah cells, as well as recruiting operatives to the Hezbollah terror group. So these were 2 airstrikes that took place over the course of the day, according to the IDF, as well as the ground operations that are happening closer to the border, actually right up against the border, according to the IDF. They said that along the border fence between southern Lebanon and northern Israel, IDF troops were able to find different weapons caches, different missile storage facilities, and even underground compounds that were built for Hezbollah operatives to actually infiltrate into Israel. So the IDF was able to eliminate, destroy these different underground terror tunnels and terror complexes and prevent the fear of another infiltration on the northern border. I say another because the main fear following October 7th on the southern border with Gaza was that Hezbollah would conduct something similar on the northern border. And so this is part of the operation that we're seeing with Israeli troops along the border with northern Israel, is to find this different Hezbollah terror infrastructure and completely dismantle it. Now, this is what we're seeing inside Lebanon right now. As far as what we've seen inside Israel throughout the course of the day, according to the IDF, they actually just weakened some of the home front command instructions to the Haifa Bay area residents. They've moved from partial activity to full activity as of 8 p.m. Israel time right here on Monday. And so I did just check the red alerts coming from what we've seen over the course of the day. No alerts sirened today in the Haifa Bay area, but just yesterday they did see some alerts indicating different drone activity. But still, the IDF is monitoring these situations at all aspects throughout the day. And anytime that they do have an assessment and see that they can weaken some of those guidelines and allow more civilians to go about their daily life, they try and do that. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now in the Haifa Bay area.
Thank you so much, correspondent Nicole Zedek, live from northern Israel. And for more, Zach Anders, you too have been covering that part of the region throughout this war. Tens of thousands of Israeli residents evacuated for more than a year now, still waiting to find out when it's going to be safe to go back. When you hear about an easing of restrictions like Nicole is describing, it's too soon to ascertain what this means long term. For the residents watching, what are they supposed to read into the latest developments?
Well, I think based on the conversations I've had recently, there's really no timeline still for when the return will take place. And it doesn't seem like this is going to be happening anytime soon, because there still hasn't been a decision made about where this operation in Lebanon is going. The beginning stages were very clear, and we're going to move into these southern Lebanese villages, we're going to fight for them, and we're going to destroy the infrastructure, especially the tunnel network underneath these frontline villages within a mile, 2 miles of the border. That's been a resounding, incredible success, to the point where in the history of modern campaigns, what has taken place with the IDF moving into this area, the casualties to the casualty ratio, Hezbollah versus IDF, is incredible. The ability to take that area and as quickly as they did is also very impressive. But one of the lingering elements here is, while these are successes and impressive, it's largely because Hezbollah did not put up a huge fight for a lot of these areas. There's still a lot of dead Hezbollah men on the ground there, but certainly nothing like what we expected would be their fiercest level of defense. They have pulled back, and by all accounts, they're trying to draw the IDF into a long, protracted campaign that is a war of attrition, very guerrilla insurgent, just moving deeper and deeper inside the country, and they're willing to lose that land. So the IDF is coming to a head where there's going to be a decision, a political decision that will need to be made, whether to continue to advance, because the opening stages of this goal, the war's aims have been met largely. So where does it go from here? And if they're okay with saying this new line that we've created is where we'll stop and we'll pull back, then I think the residents will get the okay and they'll be able to move back into the north. But if this campaign keeps going, more time to wait.
I've got a minute until the break. Yaakov, your assessment on exactly what Zach is describing.
I fully agree with Zach. I think that the cabinet in Israel is at a crossroads. It's going to have to make a decision on whether to broaden this ground maneuver, and that decision also relies on information on the IDF's available resources and demands in the Gazan arena. Everything here is interlinked. It's just one military at the end of the day that's dealing with all these arenas, or whether to try and reach an arrangement. But what's even more important than this decision is what happens after a so-called arrangement is met. Who is going to enforce it? It's clearly going to be Israel. What happens the next time Hezbollah starts crawling back towards that border, and we can be sure that they're going to try? What will happen then? Will Israel strike those efforts, as it is saying that it will? And then what will Hezbollah do? What kind of future are we going towards? This is the big question. The threat of a ground invasion, of a mass murder, conquer the Galilee invasion by Hezbollah has been lifted, and that's wonderful news for the north. The threat of firepower has been decreased, but we have a big question mark about what's going to happen in the future.
A big question mark indeed. Yaakov, Zach, stay with us. Much more to discuss right now, though. We're taking a very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues. We go live to Tel Aviv for the latest developments on a scandal over leaked classified documents. Stay tuned.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome back to The Rundown. A shocking scandal. Investigations into leaked classified documents from Benjamin Netanyahu's office. 5 suspects arrested so far. 4 of them are soldiers in an intelligence unit tasked with preventing leaks. This comes after confirmation on Sunday that one of the Prime Minister's aides, Eliezer Feldstein, who grew up in the city of Bnei Brak, was suspected of leaking sensitive security documents. More in this I-24 News report.
A suspected leak of classified Gaza documents from the Prime Minister's office has rocked Israeli politics and outraged hostage families. According to partially released court filings, several officials working in Benjamin Netanyahu's office were arrested for sharing top-secret information with foreign media outlets aimed at politically benefiting Netanyahu, who denies any wrongdoing. A 5th suspect, an IDF officer, was also arrested.
This is not a case of suspected leaks, but rather profiteering with state secrets for political purposes. The use of raw intelligence material for campaign purposes requires an investigation and a thorough examination to determine whether sensitive security information was stolen and used as a tool for political survival. This is not just a criminal offense. It is a national crime.
The leaked documents are the basis for a widely discredited article in the London-based Jewish Chronicle, which was later withdrawn, suggesting Hamas had planned to remove hostages out of Gaza through Egypt, as well as an article in Germany's Bild newspaper, claiming Hamas was dragging out hostage talks as a form of psychological warfare.
Here is an instruction document that was found in the tunnel of senior Hamas officials by our soldiers. Our soldiers found it. By the way, the media said it was Sinwar. I cannot guarantee that it was Sinwar, but I guarantee that it was senior Hamas officials. Here is the original document in Arabic, and here is its translation.
This affair originated in the Prime Minister's office, and the investigation needs to determine whether it was not under the Prime Minister's orders. If Netanyahu knew, he is complicit in one of the most serious security breaches on record. If Netanyahu did not know, then what does he know?
The primary suspect is Eli Feldstein, a spokesperson working with the Prime Minister's office, despite failing to obtain the necessary security clearance. According to the court filings, the leaks could have hurt efforts to release the hostages held in Gaza and potentially expose intelligence sources.
We're fighting for almost 400 days. We want to know that the people that make decisions do it as well, that are doing the right thing, the only thing that needs to bring them home, and nothing else that will want help to this goal.
So for an update on the story, we now go live to Israeli Defense Headquarters in Tel Aviv, and we're joined by our Emmanuel UNRRA. So Emmanuel, more details emerging in this disturbing case, the leak of sensitive security information, not only linked to the war, but specifically linked to the hostages too. What more are you learning? What can you tell us?
Right. Well, the latest reports are actually suggesting that all of those involved in this leak, the 5 suspects, as you mentioned, were not motivated by either financial gain or even political or espionage motives. But that doesn't mean that there was no harm done to these hostage negotiations. In fact, the court stated that this kind of leak did, in fact, have an impact on the hostage negotiations. And this was due to the fact that the IDF and the Shin Bet opened an investigation days after 2 articles were published early in September in European media. Now, the leak obviously made its way all the way to European media, which was really the concerning part, given the sensitive nature of the hostage talks. Now, as you can see, there is a hostage protest behind me, and it's ending now, but it was here for the last few hours with around 100 people, all of them calling for a hostage release deal. Now, these are really all different groups of people. There are people here who are anti-government and for a hostage deal, and just anyone from all different walks of life. Benita.
Thank you so much. One can imagine the range of emotions there as the story unfolds. Emmanuel UNRRA, outside Israeli Defense Headquarters in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for that update. Still in studio, Yaakov Lapin and our correspondent Zach Anders. And Yaakov, coming straight to you on this, 4 IDF soldiers arrested. They are part of an intelligence unit. Their whole role is to prevent information from leaking. This is just unconscionable. What do you make of it?
Right. I think we should separate 2 things. One is leaks to the media, which have been going on throughout this entire war, and I've actually been horrified at some of these leaks myself. And the other is where this information comes from. Right. These are 2 separate things. The legal aspect here of the investigation is not about the leak, it's about where the information was taken from. Now, if, according to suspicions, classified information was removed and released to the public, that's a serious offense. There's no question about that. But the issue of the leak is in many ways part of a pattern that's been going on. There have been different sides to this debate about the hostage negotiations, leaking information to the public to try and get their perspective across to the Israeli public. And the whole pattern has been very negative, in my opinion, and this fits into that larger pattern. But again, I make a very clear distinction between the issue of leaks and where the information came from. If there is an illegal aspect to this, if it was taken from classified intelligence sources which can expose sources, rather than, say, soldiers finding a document in a tunnel, then that's a much more serious event than just leaking information to try and, convince the public that one side or the other is right in this debate about how hostage negotiations should proceed.
How does this all impact Benjamin Netanyahu? There's no information linking him directly to the leaks, and it's not even clear if he knew about it. What is your sense?
Well, he's right now on the defensive. He has been saying that he knew nothing about this, and there's going to be a lot of accusations. It's already been politicized, which is extremely unfortunate. The fact that this entire episode has already been politicized so quickly tells us why it's become such a problematic aspect of the public debate. The hostage negotiations has split this country in a very bitter way, and I think we're already seeing the political system weigh in. Each side is trying to claim the other. I think we have to be very careful. We have to wait for the investigation to become clear. More information has to come out. The court ban order has to be decreased. So I'm not going to make any definitive statements as of now. But at the end of the day, I think it's clear that the hostage issue has been politicized. That's a negative development, and I would agree with the argument that Hamas is the one that gains from this bitter dispute within Israeli society. This isn't helping Israel. It's not helping the hostages. It's helping Hamas.
It certainly isn't helping the hostages at all, and that brings me to my next question. We are more than a year into this war, and there is no end in sight. Yeah. We know about developments across the northern front. We heard from my colleague Nicole the latest developments. We heard earlier on what Iran might be plotting. What does this all mean for 101 hostages still in captivity? We know they aren't all alive. The families are waiting for word, and then you hear updates like this.
Right. So, look, I think that we have to see whether, first of all, the elimination of Yehia Sinwar is going to create opportunities that may not be immediately visible to the public, that would enable Israeli security forces, intelligence agencies to directly approach some of these terrorists and clans in Gaza holding the hostages. And I don't think it's obvious that Hamas knows where all the hostages are, that it has full control over all the hostages. That's not self-evident at this stage when Hamas is so splintered and so pinned down and so degraded in the Gaza Strip. So that's one thing that I believe and hope is going on behind the scenes. And second of all, I think that the only way to increase now the pressure on Hamas to get them to become more flexible in their position is to start taking away their political power. I'm not talking anymore about their terror army, which has largely been disbanded and they've split up into this sort of guerrilla terror force. But now they still have hopes that they're going to be the dominant player in Gaza on the day after. And if Israel can take away that hope, then I think they will start feeling much more pressure than they felt until now, because that's their biggest fear, that they will become irrelevant on the day after. And that could really soften their negotiation position. And the only way to do that is to start taking away their ability to steal aid, distribute aid. Gaza has been the scene of Hamas hijacking of trucks, and this is their way of signaling to Gazans that they're staying, that they're relevant. If Israel starts taking that away, and there's a whole host of ways to do that, we probably don't have the time to get into that, but there have been plans that have been floated in front of the cabinet on how to do that, including one idea to bring in private U.S. security companies. That is being discussed, apparently, to distribute the aid under IDF protection. So, yeah, Zach, you clearly have an opinion.
Oh boy.
Vivid flashbacks
to Iraq.
Right, unpack that for us.
Yeah. But I'll just finish by saying it's less about the how right now, and I fully understand Zach's skepticism about that idea, and it's more about this needs to start moving forward. The political regime of Hamas has to be eliminated. This is a separate parallel effort to the military situation. That could lead to a change in the hostage talks situation.
Briefly, your concerns on what we're just hearing.
Just, you have the immediately what pops in it, was it Blackwater or Black Rock? I can't remember which. But and I could not imagine that the U.S. wants to have anything to do with it. And whichever political administration is involved, even if it is private contractors seeing an incredible amount of money from the Emiratis or the Saudis, I still think a U.S. administration steps in and goes, no, that is not happening. Good question.
We're going to take a deeper look at that and the humanitarian developments inside Gaza later on in the broadcast. So, gentlemen, stay with us right now, though. We turn the spotlight to Israel's elite covert operations, one in northern Lebanon and one in Syria. The IDF revealing that commando forces carried out a raid in southern Syria where they captured a Syrian operative working on behalf of Iranian intelligence back in July. The operation coming after the IDF apprehended a Hezbollah naval expert in a similar daring operation amid concerted Israeli efforts to go after the terror group's center of knowledge. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has the details in this report.
Another daring Israeli operation deep in Syrian territory. Israeli special forces raided the southern town of Saida in the Daraa governorate, capturing a Syrian national who gathered information on Israeli forces on behalf of Iranian intelligence, the IDF said.
منطقتك جيدة يعني استراتيجية نستفيد منها. إنه تابع لإيران اللي.
The IDF said Al-Asi, a milkman by trade, was part of an Iranian terror network. He was apprehended back in July. In his interrogation in Israel, he described his contacts with Iranian intelligence agents.
مثلا مرة قلنا له في دبابة امبارح الساعة كذا. دورية مرت الساعة كذا. تمام. ضمن هالكلام اللي صار.
The publication of the daring operation in Syria comes just days after Israeli commandos captured a senior Hezbollah operative in northern Lebanon. According to Lebanese media, some 20 Navy commandos disguised as Lebanese security forces nabbed Imad Amhaz, believed to be a significant source of knowledge in Hezbollah's naval force.
I got out to the balcony here and I saw movement in the bushes near the sea. Some people were making noise there. I heard someone say, "Go inside, internal security." I don't know if it was said to me or to someone else, but I went inside. We were terrified. They were breaking into the apartment next to ours.
On Sunday, the IDF said it eliminated a senior operative in Hezbollah's aerial unit. And so, as Israel continues to strike Hezbollah from the air and on the ground, it's also going after its sources of knowledge, limiting its ability to regroup, moving forward.
Well, there's no one better placed to give us insight into operations like this than military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin. When we see these operations, Yaakov, by Israeli special forces in Syria and northern Lebanon, they're dangerous. Give us a sense of the kind of information that is being gleaned by a successful operation.
So, in the case of Lebanon, I think that they are after information about Hezbollah's highly secretive naval unit. They want to know what kind of weapons it has, what it's planning to do. Is it planning to go after Israeli offshore gas rigs? How is it planning to hit Israeli shipping or maritime shipping that comes to Israel, military or civilian? They want to find out probably, smuggling activities, naval sea smuggling activities. Obviously, intelligence flagged this individual as having all of that information, and so they took the risk. Now, in the case of Syria, according to reports, this happened a while ago, and it's only surfacing now, more than 3 months ago. But this looks like a local Syrian who was recruited by the IRGC to gather information. And what we have to remember is, long before this whole war even began, Iran has been trying to convert southern Syria into an extension of its Lebanon war front, basically trying to create a second Lebanon-style situation with a Syrian-type Hezbollah, if you will, on the border. Now, Israel has been working around the clock for years to prevent this. This is part of that struggle of rolling the Iranians out of southern Syria, rolling them out of Syria in general. This is what the IDF is doing. This is part of that war. We have to also keep in mind that as the Iranians are issuing threats, one of the ways that they could try and hit now is through the proxies that remain in place in Syria and in Iraq. And so we've just, received word that the Israeli Air Force struck Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters in Damascus. The timing of that strike is very interesting because it's coming as Iran is threatening its response. Was that response, some of that planned to come out of Syria? We don't know, but the timing of the strike could be preemptive. So all of these arenas are linked. It's all part of one larger war. Israel pushing Iran out of the region, fighting to take Iran and its entrenchment efforts out of the region. And this is what all of these special ops are about as well.
To that point, that developing situation, new reports out of Damascus, a loud explosion near the capital. Syrian state media says an Israeli strike targeted the Sayeda Zainab area. Correspondent Zach Anders, a developing situation, as Yaakov is alluding to. What is the latest update?
I mean, we have seen strikes in and around Damascus probably every month over the last year, but you're right, it's about what's being hit here, and it sounds like a pretty significant element of Hezbollah's ability to. This is being described by the IDF as an intelligence branch, an intelligence headquarters. But the way we've seen these things shake out over the last year, it's a lot of affiliated IRGC moving, coordinating, collecting each other in the same place and being able to have access to each other's resources and to share a common goal and mission, right? So potentially the ability to hit this location, I always ask that question, right? Why is it being hit now? Why wasn't it hit long before? So something we'll look into, certainly, but it does seem to have some key elements here seem that this was based on some pretty specific intelligence, and to strike at this time rather than strike and try and take out what has to presumably be a fair share of resources already in the building that could be hit at any time, and it would prove of value to hit those. But who was there at the time, and why was it being hit now?
Yaakov.
I would just add that Hezbollah's head of intelligence was killed in Dakhia about a month ago, and also Hezbollah's head of intelligence in Syria was killed in that same strike. And so obviously different personnel were there. I think this is linked to the tensions that are ongoing right now with Iran, because at the end of the day, there's one Air Force and it has a very busy list of missions every day. So it's all about priorities. What do you hit now? Yeah. What targets do you push to the next day? So if something in Syria, in Damascus, is being hit now, I would assume it's part of an imminent threat, and we're hearing the Iranian threats. So I'm connecting a potential. I'm making a linkage between two dots. In any case, Israel is fighting day in and day out to push Iran, Hezbollah, and the Shiite militias as far away from its border and as far away out of Syria as possible.
And its ability to keep doing that on several fronts, is it clear?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening. Air Force is dealing with literally 7 fronts, and the ground forces are engaged in 3 fronts, Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank. That's the major ground forces operational arenas. So all in all, the military is extremely busy, but the Air Force is in charge of everything else. Syria, Iran. We've heard reports, unconfirmed, about strikes in Iraq. Iraq is actually in many ways the biggest question mark in my mind right now. What does Iran have stored there? How many missiles has it transferred there? How many UAVs? We know that the Iraqi militias, the Shiite militias under Iranian control, the Popular Mobilization Front militias, have stepped up their drone attacks from Iraq. Every day we're seeing reports of interceptions of drones from the east. So far it's proving ineffective. What about missiles? We don't know, but they're trying. They're definitely trying. So far they're running into a solid wall of Israeli air defenses.
A solid wall of Israeli air defenses indeed. As you say, a developing situation, several fronts all at once. I promised earlier on in the broadcast we would get back to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. So when a so-called humanitarian organization employs terrorists, it cannot continue operating in Israel. In effect, that's the message from Israel's foreign ministry. It has today officially informed the United Nations that Israel is withdrawing from the 1967 agreement recognizing the Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRRA. The Israeli parliament has passed legislation to severely limit the agency's operations in Israel, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Israel says it will continue to work with international partners, including other UN agencies, to ensure the facilitation of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza in a way that does not undermine Israel's security, adding that Israel expects the UN to contribute and to cooperate in this effort. Correspondent Zach Anders, you've been covering developments in the Gaza Strip throughout this war, the issue of humanitarian aid and the issue of this relief agency, and the very clear evidence that Israel has presented that employees of UNRWA took part in the October 7th massacre, and some are members of Hamas. What is the latest? What is your insight?
Yeah, and the thing to watch out for here is the immediate impact for UNRWA staff. How are they going to even get into Gaza or the West Bank? I mean, Gaza's obviously sealed off and has a buffer between Egypt now and the ability to even get inside Gaza. Same goes for the West Bank. You're going to have UNRWA employees who presumably fly in through Ben Gurion Airport, meet immigration checks, and present themselves as UNRWA staffers to people that work at that airport, and they already, based on their own accounts, say they get hassled when they come through the airport anyways. So it will be, I think, the most immediate thing to watch is what's going to happen for the staff that are trying to coordinate and get through Israeli territory to reach a Palestinian territory. I'll just say, too, that when you zoom out and you look at the problem on the ground, the humanitarian problem on the ground, UNRWA has been a stopgap and really, in all measures, a sliver of what needs to be done. Like you had mentioned earlier, the Hamas effort to continue to be the ones that distribute this aid and hijack the trucks and shoot at people that are trying to get at the aid. What is the end outcome here? Well, you're going to have a population of people in Gaza, and I text with contact there every day, and the situation is dire, and it's always dire. But when you zoom out and you think 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what's going to be the most shameful element of this is that there's innocent civilians caught up in this that have done nothing, and they right now are staring down the barrel of a Hamas gun trying to get at some of this aid, and there's no real international effort to be critical about UNRWA's operations, to be critical about what needs to be done in the interim, what needs to be done in the long term, and provide serious inflow of aid and start to rebuild. There's nobody right now on the international stage that's stepping up, and all of the comments that we've seen from EU members, from the US, is condemning the action against UNRWA, but offering no alternatives, and not even elevating the other UN agencies that deal with the rest of the world's refugee population. It still is really confusing to, I think, a huge segment demographic of Europeans and Americans that don't even understand that UNRWA only represents Palestinians, and it's the only UN agency that's just representing one ethnic group, and the rest of the world's refugees are left to fall under this massive umbrella and don't get personalized treatment and care. It's going to be a very shameful ending to the saga, as just civilians, just caught up in this with no real representation. Nobody's helping them.
Israel Katz, the foreign minister, hitting back at the idea that there is no alternative to UNRWA. He says that's nonsense. Your thoughts?
I think he's absolutely right. There's a bunch of UN agencies that can come and fill this vacuum as step one. And step two, I think, there's going to have to be some sort of Marshall Plan for the Gaza Strip involving funding from the Sunni Arab moderate countries that want to replace Iranian money and influence. Israel and the United States can facilitate this. And all the while, this has to be wrapped up in Israeli ongoing security control of the situation. I think it has to be a phased program, but there's no reason why other UN agencies and other international organizations can't move into Gaza, and they are in Gaza now. There are other agencies, but they're not playing perhaps a big enough role. But I think that their role will expand, and Israel is going to facilitate that now in line with its new law. It's going to be working only with those other agencies, so they'll have no choice. I don't think you can be in Gaza and not work with Israel. How are they going to get the food, the trucks? It's the IDF that facilitates all of this. So I think we're going to see a change in the landscape, in the humanitarian landscape in the Gaza Strip. UNRWA has got to go. It is part of the problem. It is a conflict creation mechanism. It has been thoroughly infiltrated by Hamas. Far too many of its members have been serving active Hamas terrorists. The propaganda that it pushes forward, it's not part of the solution, and I think it's time for it to go.
It brings me to my last question, and it's something we discussed earlier in the show. It's about the day after. I have 30 seconds left until the end of the show. From a safety point of view, the best option for the day after to make sure that what happened on the 7th of October can never happen again
is ongoing Israeli security control to make sure that Hamas does not rebuild its terror army, and a gradual sort of shift towards some sort of local Gazan self-rule. This is going to take a long time. I'll just remind viewers that after Operation Defensive Shield in the West Bank 2002, to this day, the IDF is still fighting in the West Bank. Those are the timelines that we're looking at, but it's going to be much lower intensity as time moves forward, and the situation will be much more controlled, and it will improve as time goes by, so long as Israel does not allow Hamas and Iran to move back into Gaza.
Military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin, correspondent Zach Anders, appreciate your insights and your updates. Thank you both so much for being with us on The Rundown. And with that, we wrap up for today. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching. This is I-24 News.